Welcome to Thibaud Simphal, Regional General Manager, Western and Southern Europe from Uber.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
It's great to have you. My first question, and Uber and other transportation networks already disrupted the taxi industry. What are going to be your next digital milestones?
Well, in fact, we've partnered with taxi a lot, especially in Germany here. We're in Berlin today, and we have a lot of taxis that work on the Uber platform, and this is something that we've been doing more and more of in Europe and around the world. Now, in terms of next steps and digital milestones, I think for us what we want to do is what we brought to ride-hailing, ride-sharing, which is you tap a button and you get a ride in a car. We want to bring as well for other modes of transportation. We want to bring it for e-bikes, electric bikes. We would like to bring it for e-scooters, but also small motorbikes. And then a really important piece will be mass transit. We're starting to work with transit operators, whether state-owned or private, to help people buy their tickets and use the Uber app for the full transit experience. We started doing this in Denver, in Nice in France, and we want to continue doing more of that around Europe.
Oh, very interesting. As a relatively new company to the transportation industry, which are the biggest political obstacles you have to tackle?
In general, this has been some obstacles. I would say more and more the conversation is really around how to best regulate and the difficulties sometimes regulate our platform and other platforms. The difficulties sometimes happen because some regulations were drafted before the technology age, and I guess the governments, the parliaments have to adapt those regulations to today's age. That has been something that has not always been easy and fast, especially in Europe, but we're really seeing a lot of breakthroughs around all of Europe, and there's been some great examples, I think, of countries that really embrace that, typically Estonia, Croatia, Portugal, and more also bigger countries. So I think the great thing there would be to see some of the governments also exchanging some of the best practices, because there are some good practices now on how to regulate platforms, including Uber.
Interesting. But what role should governments take in the transportation industry on its way to being digitalized?
So I think, to my point earlier, I think there's some good examples now of how to do this. And Uber is engaging with a lot of authorities around the world, with transit authorities, cities, governments, etc. And I think one thing governments can do is really exchange those best practices. And we started seeing some of that. And that way, I guess, it just makes things easier for everybody. The other thing is really to continue to have this dialogue with all of the companies in this type of sector. And we as Uber take lead on that. We really try to engage with governments around the world. And what we've seen now is that we're in very good conversations around, for example, how do you have Uber be a transit player? How do you regulate privacy, which is a very important question. These are some of the examples that we've seen.
Yeah, great. So how does the company take responsibility for human resources, especially with the perspective to possible implementation of autonomous drive?
Yeah. So this is a very important question, and I think it's a question from the people, which is technology is great, but does it also create some questions and challenges on what's the future of human labor? And I think on this, the first thing we've done is really to take the lead on that conversation and to say we understand the question, it is a challenge, and we're going to develop products and features, things that actually empower the workers that use Uber, be it restaurants, couriers, drivers, etc., to make sure they have a safety net. And we have a European partnership in 21 EU member states with AXA, for example, to make sure that from a human standpoint, they have a safety net for illness, paternity and maternity pay, etc. So that's the first thing we've done, is really help workers make sure that, even though they're independent workers in most countries, have a social safety net around them. The other piece on self-driving, to your point, autonomous driving, what we think today is that in 10 years from now, there will be more drivers than today. So yes, self-driving, autonomous driving will bring this big revolution, but for a long time, in the next 10 to 20 years, we'll need hybrid networks that have a combination of human-driven cars and self-driven cars. And that is going to be a more gradual transition than I think most people expect. The other thing we anticipate is that this new industry, which will be autonomous driving, will actually lead to the creation of new jobs. There will be plenty of jobs around it, assembly in facilities, checking some of the machines and software, making sure it's working properly, maintenance, and also helping some populations that would need help to get into the cars, outside of the cars, etc. So we actually expect that overall there will be a net creation of jobs and labor and work opportunities.
All right, very interesting. The text I revealed that the majority of Europeans don't trust in their governments to manage digitization, and the opportunities as well as the challenges. What would be your explanation for this lack of trust? Do you have an idea?
I think there are very fair questions that are being asked by people. Myself as a customer, I care about how my data is being used by companies and by tech. I care about what the government does to survey or use my data, etc. So I think these are fair questions. I think what Uber and other tech companies and governments, I think I would encourage to do is engage in this conversation and do things that reassure people. And I think one example of this has been GDPR in Europe around privacy, but there are plenty of other good examples. We've worked with Estonia, for example, and many tech companies have, to show that a government can be accessible online. And the more citizens, people engage with their own governments in a way that is also using technology, the more they will actually find it natural and trust it, provided there's some guardrails around it. And I think those guardrails definitely need to exist. I think if we all do this well, and I think media also has an important role to play, I really think we can address some of that trust and gap in the trust that people and consumers have.
Yes. Well, this might be a good follow-up, and it's also the last question.
Yeah.
What is your greatest wish for the future of Europe?
For the future of Europe, I think from an Uber point of view, I would say governments exchanging best practices, like I've said. I really think there's some positive regulations that actually focus on the outcome we want for the people. Mm-hmm. Safe transportation, affordable transportation, making sure that your data is being protected, etc. There are plenty of good examples of that. Making sure governments in Europe exchanging on that and creating a regulation that enables choice, quality, safety on technology platforms would be my Uber wish. Mm-hmm. And from more as a European citizen myself, I think what I'd love for the EU and Europe to be is a forward-looking union that is, yes, there are some challenges in the world today, but nothing we can't solve. So looking forward and trying to bring solutions to the table and relying also on citizens, associations, think tanks, companies to help find solutions would be my wish. So we have a Europe where everyone is happy and we can all use these great services and trust that the future brings opportunity as well as the challenges that we've talked about.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.